Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building. It's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
if you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
And you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BSing, no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
The podcast is also brought to you by Gerber. Go to gerbergear.com and learn about the knives, the Vital, the Big Game Vital, the Gator Premium, all the things that we use when we're out in the woods, and not just knives, but also some really cool multi-tools that they have.
And we have a promo code for Gerber as well. Just use the code ELKTALK to save 20% on your orders at gerbergear.com. And we are also brought to you by Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls. And Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is the original designer and inventor of the pallet plate diaphragm that's completely changed the way elk calls are made and used. And to find out more and to order your elk calls, go to RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com or BuglingBull.com and use promo code ELKTALK, and you're going to save 15% on all of your elk calls and elk call accessories.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by GoHunt.com. Go to GoHunt.com and sign up for the Insider. The Insider is changing how hunts and hunting information are found. No doubt about that. Use promo code ELKTALK, and when you sign up for the Insider, you're going to get $50 of store credit, mad money, in their gear shop.
Lastly, the University of Elk Hunting online course is a proud partner of the Elk Talk Podcast. And within the University of Elk Hunting online course, you're going to find nearly 60 chapters organized in 17 modules of elk hunting instruction aimed at making you a more successful elk hunter. From planning and e-scouting to calling strategies and packing, every imaginable elk hunting topic is included in the online course. And regardless of your previous elk hunting experience or success, I'm confident the University of Elk Hunting online course will make you a more confident, more successful elk hunter. Just visit elk101.com and use the promo code ELKTALK to save 20% when you sign up for a membership to the University of Elk Hunting online course.
And with that, Corey, we are ready to get into it.
Let's jump into it.
Hey, Corey, how hot is it in Idaho today?
Well, it's for Idaho, it's hot. For the first part of June, it's hot. And for the dry year we're headed into, it's hot. So, yeah, it's hot all the way around.
Yeah. Here in Montana, it's supposed to be 97 degrees tomorrow, which will be whatever that'll be, 4th of June or something. It's like, oh my gosh. And last week I was up walleye fishing and it was 40 degrees, raining and 25-mile-an-hour wind. I had a snot roll coming off my nose there. My wife told me to get a hanky. I'm like, honey, the better answer is let's get off the lake and go to the cabin. I come here to have fun, not to freeze to death.
And she probably said, get back to flaying my fish.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, we it's 6 hours there and 6 hours back, and the wind blew so hard every day. In the 3 days of fishing time we had allotted, we didn't spend 12 hours on the lake, but we spent 12 hours in the truck getting there and back. So, yeah, welcome to the high plains. But oh well, I was out doing something rather than. Right now, it's too hot to even go on a hike.
Yeah,
I'm sure the folks in Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico are like, oh my, poor you, it's 90 degrees. Try 110 buckshot. Oh, wow. But you know what's got me worried is we didn't have a lot of moisture this winter. I don't know if you guys did. We had like 80 to 90% of our normal moisture. And if we're going to have this much heat this early, all the snow has gone off all the south-facing and west-facing slopes in our mountains. This is not good.
Yep, it's the same here. In fact, last year I did really well picking morel mushrooms. And so this year I thought, I'm going to get back out and see if I can replicate the success there. And I started last year on Memorial Day weekend. That's when they start popping up here. And I probably went through at least the middle towards the latter part of June. You know, obviously happened to go up in elevation as the season progressed, but I went out low elevation last week and the morels were already dried up and the foliage was so just lush and thick that, I mean, we're 4 weeks ahead of a normal year as far as things blooming. Huckleberry bushes are already drying up and huckleberries are dying and they're not even a bloom. I mean, they're barely bloomed yet. They haven't even started growing and the huckleberries are all falling off. All the blooms are falling off. The leaves are dried up and they just look like they look in late September, just all dried and red leaves. And
that doesn't paint a pretty picture.
No, if we don't get some good summer moisture, it could be a rough year.
Yeah, it could be really rough. That's my worry is, okay, they had a pretty easy winter, but you know how it goes about every fourth or fifth year up here in the Northern Rockies. We get an easy winter followed by a super dry summer. The range conditions are terrible because of the drought. And then that year we get a killer winter and the animals have went into the winter pretty much at their lowest point because we just didn't have good moisture with good vegetation. And so it doesn't take much of a winter to knock a bunch of them off. And I'm worried about that. Besides all the fires that we're probably going to have, instead of August, it'll be the 4th of July or something.
Yep. No, and that's, we always say on really moist springs when it gets, when everything's just lush and green and there's just a whole bunch of growth, we always say, well, if it dries off this summer, it's going to be bad because we've created a whole bunch of fuel. I mean, if that holds true, this summer shouldn't be a bad fire year because all of the fuel is dead. We didn't get near the overburst of undergrowth this year that we usually get.
Yeah, that's true. Have you ever turned a tag back because of a drought situation, or would you?
I have not, and I wish I would have. I hunted Utah. Yeah, I drew Utah, and Utah takes a lot of points to draw. And I drew a good tag in Utah, and it was the worst drought Utah had in 30 years. And several people said, you can turn it back in and restore your points and draw it next year. And me not having a real firm concept at that point of, first off, desert states that have more of the non-migratory elk, the effect that drought has on them. And I just thought, hey, an elk's an elk. It's still going to rut. Yeah, the rut might be a little bit less active than it would otherwise be, but I'm still going to be able to find elk. And if anything, they'll be concentrated. And so I went into it with that mindset. And on day 7 of an 8-day hunt, I had only called in, I think, 2 or 3 elk. And we ended up pulling up roots and going to the other side of the unit, and they were just screaming over there. So I wish I'd have listened, because it was a tough hunt. It was nothing like what it usually was, and the experience was pretty disappointing. But I was warned and didn't heed that advice. But if I was to draw Arizona or Utah or Nevada on a year when drought was a consideration, I would turn it back in a heartbeat. As excited as I am to hunt those states, those are states that are, top tier, not only for trophy size elk, but just for the experience. And
well, the reason I ask is, since our last podcast, my son Matthew, on his 19th try, finally drew elk in Nevada. And in the last few days, some people have emailed me, have you seen what the moisture is? Do you understand that this could be a really bad year? It's like, well, we're going anyhow, I think, unless Matthew changes his mind. But I got to put on the calendar. But when you start getting warnings from people who live there and see it, it's like, am I a fool enough to turn back a tag? Not me, but is Matthew fool enough to turn back a tag that took 19 times? And it might take 29 more to draw. Who knows?
I was just going to say, with states like Oregon and Colorado and Utah, where they have a preference point system and you're guaranteed to draw when you have the most points, you can turn your tag back in and know probably next year, if not within the next couple of years, you're going to draw it again, because it's a preference system. But in a state like Nevada and other states that have a bonus point system, you have a lot better odds maybe, but your odds are not approaching anything that makes you excited, because there's a lot of people with a lot of points and you're just one more name in the hat.
Yeah. Looking at last year's numbers out on the Go Hunt Insider, his odds with 19 points for this tag were 3.7%.
Yep.
So
you almost dragged me down a tangent on bonus points again, but I'm going to refrain.
I mean, that's once every 30 years. It's like, all right, whatever he wants to do, it's his tag. Doesn't matter to me. But when I start getting emails like that, I'm like, how you were saying, I thought I can't, elk are elk. That's what's in my mindset also. But when you hear it from people who you respect and they live there and see it, you start to have a little bit of the question in the back of your mind of, am I just being bullheaded here? Am I ignoring the warning signs? Iceberg, dead ahead. Who cares? Give it the full steam, and pretty soon you're the Titanic. You're out there dog paddling in the frozen North Atlantic. So, but, oh well. I guess not my tag. I don't need to make up my mind. I got it on the calendar. If it doesn't happen, I guess I'll get to stay home and shovel snow or something.
Yeah.
So
what season is that? What time of year?
He drew. It's in November. There's Nevada. They have most units have a first rifle season and a second rifle season. He drew the first rifle season. So November 6th through the 20th, I think it is, something like that.
Well, if he turns his tag back in and you're just sitting home shoveling snow, I know somebody that has a third season rifle mule deer tag in Colorado that took 16 points to draw, and you'd be welcome to tag along on that.
Really?
Yeah.
Can I bring my llamas?
Can you bring your llamas? You can bring Bo Beatty if you want.
Well, Bo drew Colorado this year.
Well, there we go.
So maybe he'll just meet you. Maybe you guys will be like doing the handoff. He'll just tie off the llamas and you can pick them up.
I was hoping he would be in camp to cook, but I've eaten his cooking before at hunting camp. And
well, I got news for you. He's going to be in a Rocky Mountain, Montana goat camp. I've already obligated him to that because he was with me when I saw this goat that I ended up drawing the tag for. We called him Grubby because he was all dirty. So I texted him. I'm like, hey, Bo, I drew a tag for Grubby. He's like, what date? I'm going to be there. I'm like, all right, here are the dates. So Sorry, we're kind of busy in November, Corey. I think you're on your own.
You just told me it's on the calendar for Matthew's hunt, and if he turns his tag back in, you're just going to be sitting at home shoveling snow. So
yeah, you're right.
I've got it recorded. I'm going to have tens of thousands of witnesses that are going to hear this, and you try pulling a mountain goat hunt on me in November, and I'm going to say, hey, that was not on the calendar.
Well, if he turns his tag back in, I'm going to disinherit him. All $20 he might inherit from me, I'm going to give to a charity.
My kids ask about inheritance once in a while. I'm like, the only thing you're going to inherit from me is debt, so don't get too excited. I will have spent everything I've made by the time that we need to talk about inheritance. So.
That's my goal. Somebody one time, Bozeman has a lot of what they call trust funders. They're like, kids who move here to be ski bums and live off the trust parents set up for them. And one day somebody said, "Hey, I heard you're a trust funder." I'm thinking to myself, well, let's see. I grew up in a trailer house in a little logging town, and I said the only trust fund in my family was my parents were trusting I'd figure out a way to fund their retirement. That was a trust fund in my family. But oh well. Anyhow, you brought up a topic I want to explore a little more. You said migratory. You introduced the term migratory versus non-migratory elk, and I've been doing a lot of, I don't know what you'd call it, not research, but just putting my thoughts together on that topic, because we get a lot of questions from people, and just by how they ask the question, you can almost tell if they live in a state like Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, maybe Utah, where the elk don't go on these long migrations that you and I see in Idaho and Montana. But then where we live, we got migratory elk. So I've started approaching the way I answer questions and how I prioritize what the needs are based on, are these elk migratory or are they not migratory? So I'm almost asking people, when they ask me a question, my first question back is, do your elk migrate or not migrate? Because it does make quite a bit of difference in how the elk use the landscape between the northern Rockies and other places where the elk really don't have to migrate. So,
I was just going to ask you what the difference was and how that difference plays into the answer you give on where to find elk and how to hunt elk and all that.
Yeah. Well, I kind of look at it as moisture or lack thereof in the non-migratory herds causes the elk to use the landscape in a certain way, in somewhat similar fashion of how bad weather or lack of bad weather cause the elk up in our part of the world to use the landscape differently. In other words, it's probably one of the bigger variables I have to take into account. And I'll use an example of either a high moisture year with great monsoons or a drought year like they're having right now. And when I go down and hunt those states, what I notice is that in a drought year, the elk are not as dispersed across the landscape. They're in very small pockets. But when you find those pockets of where they are, they're in high densities. In other words, it's kind of like if you took all the marbles in your bag and instead of spreading them out equally on the floor, you put them in little piles here and there. And it's like, oh, it took me a while to find this pile of elk, but boy, there's a pile of them here. And it's not just the water itself, the surface water that they need, but you think about how these drought years affect what the food is and how the food is able to be utilized. And by that, I mean, if you are hunting a spot that has a public land grazing allotment and it's a drought year like this, the cattle are probably going to consume most of that available forage. So where are the allotments that are not being utilized this year? Because they have these rotation plants. Maybe it's a winter allotment summer allotment, whatever. There are rotations, so you can use that to your advantage. There are some preferred feeds that are more drought resistant than others. And so the elk have to find those places, and they're really good at finding them, where these forage sources are able to grow even in the presence of this severe drought. So that causes two needs, the food and water need, to elevate a little bit higher in when you're trying to solve for where will you find them. The food and water need end up being higher up the priority list than they maybe would be in a high moisture year, just because of the scarcity of food and water. So that's the example that I'm trying to put into something sane here. You asked me to do some more chapters, modules, whatever, for your University of Elk Hunting course.
Yeah.
And this is one of them that I did. And we filmed it last week or week before I went fishing. And we're editing it this week. And when you look at it, you might say, Randy, start over, man. This makes no sense. But I think it'll make some sense. And the same thing when I talk about migratory elk. We're talking about sanctuaries in both these instances, but all sanctuaries aren't created equal. The sanctuaries that are closest to the other primary need is the preferred sanctuary. So if we have really, really mild winter, when you're hunting a post-rut or late season in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, maybe even Colorado, those elk are going to be at higher concentration levels at the top of their transition range, just because there's no need for them to go low yet. But if we have early winter, early cold, lots of snow, they're going to be mid or bottom part of the transition range, and they're going to be in sanctuaries in that part of the transition range. So these generalized patterns of weather and moisture have some big impacts, differing impacts, about whether this is a migratory group of elk you're hunting or a non-migratory group of elk. So hopefully when I finish that, you'll say, Newberg, you're not all as dumb as I thought you were. But
yeah, I was just going to say, there are a lot of rabbit holes you could go down into when you start diving into, moisture versus drought, migratory versus non-migratory, post-rut versus late season versus peak rut versus early season versus pre-rut. And now you start putting the combination of all those together. If you are in a non-migratory area where there's drought late season, there is a specific game plan for that. And you start looking at all those combinations, and there's almost hundreds of things that you have to account for and be prepared for.
And that's why people say, Newberg, why do you have so many locations on your e-scouting map? Because I don't know what it's going to be until I get there. Even though, like right now, I have a general idea that in Nevada, Matthew and I are working on his scouting plan. Guess what? It's going to be pretty dry. So there's a bunch of locations I can just cross off. I mean, general trends like that, you can handle. Now, my e-scouting plan for Montana, I'm going to have a whole bunch of different options, but I'm not really going to finalize which one I'm going with until probably a week before season, where I say, oh, we haven't had any snow. Man, they're going to be way up high, just like happened to me in Colorado last year. Yeah. Last year for me, that Colorado hunt was at almost 12,000 feet. It was and this is where the light bulb came on, because the camera crew was asking me some questions. I'm like, well, this is what everybody does. They're like, no, I don't think so. There's nobody else up here. If everybody else did it, they'd be up here with us. I'm like, oh. And the point of that was I had a bunch of different options. When we got there, I realized it was 75 degrees. It had been warm all fall. These elk aren't going to be down at 10,000 feet. They're going to be up at 12. And so I had an e-scouting option that provided for that. So I said, all right, throw away plans A and B. We're going with plan C. And that's what we did. And we found plenty of cooperative elk. So I use that as an example of why it matters, because if I would have showed up and my only plan was, all right, it's going to be, this plan is really good when there's 4 feet of snow up there at 13,000 feet. And so I was hunting down at 9,000. I don't know that I would have seen any elk. And I would have said, boy, this was a ripoff. Why did I spend 3 points on this hunt? So my point of making all that complicated as I have is that these little variables that we may overlook or take for granted actually play a really big part of where you will find the elk at the time you're trying to hunt them.
Yeah.
So,
Very
that make
cool.
any sense?
No, totally. And that just got my brain spinning. That, I mean, it just adds layers and layers of not complexity necessarily, but details that you need to know to be able to find elk. It's, me growing up in Idaho and hunting a migratory herd when drought isn't a concern. I just think about the hunt that I went on in Utah. Had I known, then even what I know now, let alone what I'm excited to learn when you complete all of the modules that you're making for the online course, it would have changed my outlook on it. It would have changed the way I hunted. In Idaho, you just kind of grind it out. It's like, hey, if I put in 8 straight days, eventually we're going to get into elk. And down there, it wasn't the case. We needed to completely move to a new location and look for those primary factors that they're needing, and knowing what the primary factor. I mean, obviously we knew water was a factor, but there was water where we were, but there was also cattle. There was also buffalo. There was, there a lot of things competing for a very limited resource. And I think, there was a lot of private beyond where we were. And I would imagine that with the agriculture and everything going on there, they probably had the water. And I'm guessing that's where the elk all disappeared to and stayed in that area. So, yeah, a lot of things to consider.
The BLM range cons are going to hate me for saying this, but they've all got an email from me in the last week. Hey, I need to know each allotment and what the grazing period is for each allotment. And that's public information. And I don't need to make a full-blown freedom of information request. They'll usually tell you, oh, this is my district. Here's the allotments. This one's being rotated and it won't be used this year. I can't believe I just let that little cat out of the bag.
I was going to say.
Anyhow, in non-migratory herds, all of the BLM range cons get an email from me asking that stuff, because if it's a really high moisture year, it really doesn't matter that much, because the cattle domestic grazing is not going to impact the forage base enough in a good moisture year.
Yeah.
In a bad moisture year like this, any place that's being grazed or grazed right up just before the elk season we're going to be on, I pretty much almost cross those off my list. So if that's 2/3 of the unit, now I know I've only got 1/3 of the unit left to be looking around.
Yep.
No price for that advice, and it's probably worth what you paid for it.
Well, it might even be worth a little more this time. I think we could consider that a nugget.
I know some people are like, Newberg, shut up. Don't be telling everybody those kind of secrets. And I know what the BLM guys are going to be saying. Why? Shut up, man. We got enough to do. But my point of that is, in the same, I don't know how many times I've done this in New Mexico, Arizona, I've usually done it with the Forest Service folks, because most of the elk there are on Forest Service. But to me, that's a big issue. Elk are highly selective, and they're going to go find where are the sanctuaries, because Matthew's hunt is a late season hunt. So we'll use this as a planning example. We know it's late season, so sanctuaries are going to be priority once the shooting starts. There's not a lot of hunting pressure in this unit, so it's not like in Colorado. By the 3rd season over the counter, those elk they've they've found caves to crawl in. They're looking for sanctuaries so much. So it won't be quite as dramatic, the sanctuary effect, in a place with this limited of hunting pressure. But they still, once the first shots are fired, that's where they're going. And they're going to the sanctuaries that are closest to the best feed. That way they don't have to travel very far to feed each day. They know that too. Old Pete, he went on a nature walk last year and he got brought home in the back of someone's F-150. They're like, don't be like Pete. So the sanctuaries, first of all, as a general rule, they're going to be attracted to the places with the best forage that haven't been competed with by cattle. So they're going to be in those general areas anyhow. And then they're going to be in the sanctuaries areas in those spots closest to water. So that's how I will connect those dots in those priorities.
Yep.
And who knows, maybe we'll go there and we won't even see an elk.
I doubt it.
Now that I laid all that out,
Yeah.
you know what people are going to say? Don't listen to that chucklehead. Look at him. They can't even put together an e-scouting plan for Nevada. What kind of hopeless operation are they?
See, that's the problem with giving elk hunting advice and then filming your hunt. Because people are able to see right through. It's like, oh, that didn't work. All right, let's find a new podcast to listen to.
Yeah, as they say, brag about your shooting after the hunt, not before the hunt. But anyhow, I throw that out there because doing this e-scouting for this hunt, just what Matthew and I are already starting on, it really brought to light kind of what I learned last year in Colorado. I mean, I've kind of known it. I've never formalized it, I guess, is what I'm saying here. I'm now making it a more formal part of what I do. It's highlighted to me the difference between migratory elk and non-migratory elk.
Yeah.
And so anyhow, I don't know. Have we completely destroyed that subject?
I don't think we destroyed it.
Enough.
I was going to say, I think we covered it,
okay.
though. Oh.
Okay, we made up enough stories about that. We got a question from a listener. Oh, before we go on, when do you need this for the university course? Did you tell me you needed it by like June 10th or something?
Well, I mean, we're approaching it. I think a lot of people are. I always look at it as Memorial Day weekend is kind of when people start thinking a little more seriously about their fall plans. And so having information to research and learn and all of that. So yeah, anytime from here on out, I'd say by the time 4th of July comes, they're transitioning more into family vacations and physical conditioning and some of those things and spending less time learning. So it kind of tapers off there. So June's always a good month for sure.
Oh man!
Did you say you were almost done? Is that what I heard?
No. I'm saying I got to call my wife now and say, honey, these 2 other fishing trips we have in June, I got to cancel those because Corey gave me a deadline.
I was just going to say, don't you dare blame me for that. Get me in trouble with your wife.
We'll be. She saves all of her harshness for me, and if she doled it out where it was deserved, she'd be way harsher. She's not harsh at all, but if she ever does get kind of a little side-eyed, it'll be at me, not you.
Okay,
I mean, I shouldn't even say harsh. She puts up with more crap. I don't know. Someday she's going to wake up, Corey, and say, what am I doing with this knucklehead? Oh, man, I hope that day never comes. Anyhow, but how can your course, I mean, we got to put the plug in for it. You never will, so I always got to bring it up because Mr. Modesty is like, well, I don't like being a sales guy. So if they use promo code Elk Talk out at the University of Elk Hunting course, they get $20 off, right?
Yep.
Or did you quit that?
No, it's
okay.
Did I quit that? Not yet. Limited time offer though. This where we become salesmen. No, it's
you and Billy Mays.
Yeah. $20 off. And there's no better time than right now to dive in. And there's just a whole bunch more information than, you start breaking down migratory, non-migratory, archery season, rifle season, post-rut, peak rut, and all of that. And that's why I invited Randy to contribute his expertise and his vast knowledge and experience in that late season and post-rut. And because it's something, I don't have a lot of experience in, especially when you start diving into those details like you just mentioned and talked about. It's, that's your wheelhouse. And so to have you be able to provide that information on the same platform and in the same resource that, we share other elk hunting resources and information and tactics and everything, it just makes it that much better and that much more complete. So I'm excited to see what you come up with.
Well, feel free to edit and send back with like Ralphie in A Christmas Story. He got a C+ on his paper. Graded however you need to, and we'll try to get to at least a B-. So, but anyhow, where go to elk101.com.
Click on the link. I'm sure the homepage, there's plenty of banners and links there. And if you can't find it, just at the top, click on the one that says online course, and it'll walk you through the process.
Cool. All right. I didn't want to leave that without forcing you to be a salesman for at least a minute.
I recognize that.
But our next question comes from a listener who asked this. It was kind of a two-part question. What data do we use when we're selecting which over-the-counter or general or region, like in states where you say the general tag in Montana or Wyoming, or the over-the-counter in Colorado, and the zones in Idaho? What data do we use to decide which of these many possible units or locations do we hunt? And then he had a kind of a second part to that question of, is the harvest data really that reliable, or does it just show how many lazy hunters there are?
That's a great question.
I look at it that I say the population of hunters between the really hardcore get after it guys and the lazy guys, and is about the same across every unit.
The same thing,
so
yeah.
I don't attribute it to that. I think he meant to put a smiley face on that before he hit the send button, but it didn't come through.
No, and I think you're exactly right there. When I look at harvest percentages in each unit, I just assume that there is a pretty steady mix of hardcore hunters and lazy hunters, and somewhere in the middle is the average, and that's what they take the harvest percentage off of. And I would say, there are going to be units that are absolutely rugged and no roads or access in there, and that the people that are hunting that are probably getting after it. And, something like that, you might expect it would have higher success rates because the more serious hunters are there. But in actuality, it's usually the opposite. And it's just because it's so rugged and tough that, the elk are able to keep ahead of us, and it's a little tougher to track them down. So, there's a lot of things to consider. And I definitely do take that into consideration when I look at the harvest success and say, okay, if it's 15%, that's fairly decent. It means there's definitely elk there. People are getting into elk and having opportunities. But then when I see something like 40% success rates in a over-the-counter hunt for archery season or something, it just makes me think there's got to be elk running all over the top of people all day. And it's not because there's better hunters there. I would imagine that some of the lazy hunters are probably drawn to that because they see that success rates are high. So, yeah, I think the data is definitely reliable. And that's one of the first things I look at. I mean, that's, I was talking to you before we started the podcast. I've been spending quite a bit of time on Go Hunt in the filtering 2.0 portion of it, looking at over-the-counter options because we didn't draw hardly anything this year. And so I'm like most years looking at over-the-counter opportunities. And, there are things, it's funny how you think that, okay, I want to go to an area that has the best trophy potential. And then you look at the bull-to-cow ratio there is low. And it's like, well, I'd settle for a little bit lower than the best trophy potential. And then you look there and it's like, okay, success rates are low. And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to look at success rates. I want the highest success rate. And I look there and I see something like 34%. And I'm like, okay, now we're talking. And I look at the bull-to-cow ratio and it's low. And so, I don't think there's any one factor that weighs heavily, most heavily in that decision. It's that combination of trying to find the unit or the units that offer a better than average statistic for each of those factors. And so it's, and there are some people that do go based strictly off a trophy, some that go strictly off a bull-to-cow ratio. I mean, there are over-the-counter units in Idaho that have a bull-to-cow ratio of over 60 to 100. And, we're talking over-the-counter.
Can you tell me where those are?
Well, go to Filtering 2.0, and all you have to do is slide the little dial there, and you can see it. But so those factors I look for, that is one of them. And the nice thing about Filtering 2.0 is, trophy potential for me, especially in a state like Idaho, every unit here's got a 320 to a 350 inch bull. You probably aren't going to see one. Most of us aren't going to get to see one during the season while we're hunting, but they're there in just about every unit. So when I look at the trophy potential, it's more of the average. If it's 300 inch average trophy potential, that tells me, okay, there's a good mix of mature bulls there. If I see the average trophy potential in a unit in Idaho is 330 inches, I'm thinking, okay, that's probably managed more for trophy potential, and it probably doesn't have a general rifle season, some things like that. So there's always some factors there, but I don't put a whole lot of stock in the trophy potential, but I do usually set it when I'm looking at Filtering 2.0 at 300 or better is an opportunity that you would have. And then you can filter out season dates if you want to hunt archery over the counter, if you want to hunt early rifle over the counter, all of that you filter out. And then public land, which again, Idaho, Colorado, Wyoming, there are a handful of units, and you're going to know because they're close to more of the metropolitan areas, more of the cities. You're going to know that some of those units are probably going to have less public land. But for the most part, I think any of these units, you're going to expect 80 to 90% public land, and access probably isn't going to be a problem. So I usually don't even mess with public land. It might be the last filter that I scroll through. And then that leaves harvest success. And we're talking over-the-counter general type tags, and if the average is 10 or 12%, I'm going to start high, and I'm going to look and see which of those units have really high harvest success rates. And then I'm going to go through and see why. Why are they so high? And there's usually a reason. That you can usually determine that it's okay, it is limited public land, so more private land. You can look at the number of tags that are sold, at least in Idaho. You can see how many tags were sold for that specific unit last year and get an idea of, okay, there's only 40 people hunting this unit. I'm not going to have to worry about hunting pressure, and 25% success is great, but only 10 elk were killed in all of archery season. So, there are a lot of factors that go into it beyond just the initial ones. And then bull-to-cow ratio is always a fun one for me. I like a high bull-to-cow ratio. It just makes calling that much better.
And I look at that, and I also look at trends. If I can see some sort of trend line, if we have a bull-to-cow ratio and a cow-to-calf ratio, most of biologists I talk to say if the cow-to-calf ratio is 30 or higher, the herd is maintaining or growing. Once you get under 30, it's probably in decline. So I look at stuff like that. What are the trends? Sometimes you'll have these anomalies where just one year all of a sudden is a really high harvest year. It's like, okay, was that weather? Was that some crazy thing that happened? And then the other thing I always am careful of is I want to make sure that when the state is reporting the harvest percentage, some states include the cow harvest in there. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just want to know, that's why this state has a 58% harvest percentage. They include the cow tags in the harvest results. So just when you see those high harvest percentages, look a little closer, I guess is
they're a starting point.
The answer. If it seems too good, it might be. Yeah. So I do trust that data. It's been useful for me. And if I'm picking an over-the-counter unit, like when I hunt Montana or when last year I had the general tag in Wyoming, all that stuff comes into play. Same when I do over-the-counter units in Colorado. All comes into play. So, speaking of which, most of the draws are done. I think. Are there any elk drawings? Oh, you guys in Idaho still
just for another day or two. So
posted your.
Yeah, June 5th is the deadline.
The deadline is coming up, and then you'll be posting. You guys turn your results around pretty quick, though.
Yeah, the deadline's June 5th, and it's usually
not quick enough, but
usually within 3 weeks, though, which is pretty darn good.
Yeah. So, with Idaho being, how's Oregon? Their deadline was May 15th.
Yep.
Did they post their draw results yet?
I've not seen anything there. Of course, I didn't apply, so I'm not anxiously awaiting, but I think we would know.
Yeah. So what do we have left? If someone hasn't drawn a tag in one of the limited entry states, they've got Colorado over the counter. Montana has some return tags that'll go on sale usually in late July or early August. Idaho has some return tags. Oregon has over the counter. Utah has some over the counter or spike only.
Yep.
Am I missing some?
Washington has some over-the-counter, west side for Roosevelt, and there's some over-the-counter for Rocky Mountain elk on the east side of the state.
See, there you go. I live in a small world. That's why I hang out with the world traveling type, like Corey Jacobson, man of many elk languages.
Honestly, it's a lot of me just sitting here dreaming about elk destinations and be like, I need to learn about that state. I need to learn about that one. I've never hunted in Washington. I just know that there's opportunity there.
Yeah. So if you want all this, Brady and Trail will be doing strategy articles about where all these are out on the Insider. They'll probably have those out in the next couple of weeks, it'd be my guess. But if you sign up for Go Hunts Insider, you get the maps, you get all that stuff now. Use promo code Elk Talk, and they're going to give them a $50 gift card in their gear shop.
Man,
right?
Yeah, it's a great deal. And that's the second time that we've promoted the promo code Elk Talk. It must be a common theme here.
Must work.
Yeah, it must work. Yeah. Nobody's told us otherwise anyway.
Yeah. At least not yet.
Yep.
But so we've rattled off all those states, and now people are like, shut up, guys. I don't want everyone to know where you can still go hunting this year. But it kind of fits our premise of you and I always saying that even if it's not the greatest hunt in the world, going out and allowing yourself to, one, be in the woods and have some fun, but two, make a few mistakes, just adds to your lifetime of elk hunting knowledge. So please go do that.
Absolutely.
Whoever's listening, don't sit at home for a year. Go find some place to do it. So
no better time than right now.
And then I'm going to ask you this question, Corey, because rumor has it that you're going to be in Big Sky for the Total Archery Challenge.
I am. Yep.
Is that true?
That is true.
Okay. And you told me that you're going to shoot the course.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Of course. Yeah, a couple times.
Okay. Really?
Well,
Man, you must have way better shoulders than I do.
I have been fortunate to be able to shoot my bow a lot.
Yeah. I shot that course up there the first year I went to it. I'm trying to remember. That was like 2015 or something. My shoulders being as bad as they are, I almost thought I was going to have to turn back my archery tag. Shooting that many arrows in one session? Oh my gosh. I just wanted to cry. My shoulders hurt so bad. So that's why I shoot 3 arrows for breakfast, 3 for lunch, and 3 for dinner. I know people are like, well, no wonder you're such a bad shot, Randy. But I've watched you, and in fact, it is actually on film where we ran into a flock of grouse. And Corey, I think here's what I think happened. Corey got an elk to bugle right from the parking lot. And while he's over there calling to this elk, I'm throwing rocks at grouse. I come running back. I get my bow, and Corey sees me all excited. He thinks I'm grabbing my bow because we're going to go kill this elk. Well, I'm spinning off my broadhead and putting judo points on, and I shot it. I shot the close grouse. This blue grouse jumps up on a dead, leaned over tree, 30, whatever it was, 35, 38 yards out there. And I see Corey draw aim. I'm like, oh, he's going to center punch this thing. He shot its head off. I'm like, I couldn't do that if he gave me 1,000 arrows. And I'm like, you hit that thing in the head. And he looks at me like, yeah. So
they don't have a whole lot of meat on them.
Pay really.
You don't want to waste meat.
True. But I don't want them to get away either. So I have no problem shooting them right between the shoulder blades. Every once in a while I luck out and I hit him in the head, but not due to skill. So after that, I'm like, I'm gonna pay close attention to what this guy does with his setup and how he does everything. So you got any little tips or ideas of what you do when you are setting up your bow and getting ready? Because I suspect you try to get it set up and then it's fine tuning for a while. And then it's just practice for the rest of summer.
Yeah, pretty much.
You see any things that people do wrong?
And I'll put another little plug in here, and I'm becoming less modest on the online course, I guess, but we're actually creating an archery module for the University of Elk Hunting online course specific to getting into archery, setting up your bow, and all of that. And so it has been top of mind recently, and I actually have set up, I think, 4 or 5 bows now in the last 4 weeks between mine and my kiddos and friends and stuff. So, for me, again, it goes back to my engineering background and my linear thought process, and most will probably say being anal and OCD, but I'm so particular about setting up a bow and making sure that it's not just close. There is no such thing as close enough. It has to be perfect. And, there's been times when I've had to send a bow back or dug into it and said, there's just something wrong. I'm not able to tune this thing perfectly. And we get looking, and one of the limbs is weaker than another one, and it's just causing a little bit of an imbalance. But you can see that when you're really just precisely tuning a bow. And so I really spend a lot of time up front on that, so that I don't see issues, once I do get fine-tuned. And it's like, man, I just don't want to chase moving issues down the road. I'd rather do it up front. So I spend a lot of time on the setup, just getting, make sure I'm at the absolute center point on the string, and it's not measuring and dividing by 2 just because of the way the cams rotate and everything. You don't end up with that center point. So finding the absolute center point, finding, making sure that the arrow is sitting on the rest. I use levels and everything to get it dialed in. But from there, the tuning of it. And people, there's a lot of different ways to tune. You can bare shaft tune, you can walk back tune, you can paper tune. And for me, any of those work, but it's really just to get me close at that point. And so I am very particular on paper tuning. That's what I use. And I shoot and I shoot and I tweak and I tweak until I have a perfect bullet hole through paper. And from there, then I put on broadheads and field points and go back to 30 yards and, dial in the pin on the bow and then shoot broadheads and field points. And if they're not hitting in the exact same place at 30 yards, my bow's not tuned. And so I'll take some time then and really fine tune it to get it. Because people argue all the time that you can't get broadheads and field points to fly the same. And there hasn't been a year in the last 15 years that I have not had my broadheads and field points hitting exactly the same out to 100 yards. And it's just a matter of, that fine tuning. Now, is it good enough to have your broadheads hit close to your field points out to 50 yards and go hunting with it? Yeah, I think for most people that's, close enough is good. But for me, I have so many other weaknesses and handicaps when it comes to hunting that I want to make sure that if there's anything I can remove from that bucket that I do it. And so that's, I spend a lot of time. I probably spend a good 2 weeks just getting that bow tuned and shooting it, making sure things are good before I really even start fine tuning the sights, because I want to make sure the bow is dialed in. So when I start fine tuning the sights, once I get them set, I don't have to monkey with them the rest of the year. And so I'm at a point right now where I'm just about done dialing in the sights. Everything's sighted in, and now it's just a matter of repetition, shooting 4 arrows at a time at a little dot and just noticing, okay, am I hitting just slightly low? Am I hitting just slightly left? Do I need to tweak anything to get it dead on? And here within the next week or so, I'll probably have that dialed in, and then the next 2 months are just repetitive practice, just shooting. And that's why I like the Total Archery Challenge, like you brought up at Big Sky. It's just, for me, it's not the shoulder work. I mean, most of the courses have, I think, 20 targets, and you shoot an arrow at each target, but you're covering 7 or 8 miles and several thousand feet of vertical at those. And so it gives you an opportunity to wear a backpack, to go for 5 or 6 hours, to hike between targets, to get tired, and it really replicates an actual hunting situation about as good as anything can.
Well, that's good to know. I lied when I said I only shoot 3 for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I did shoot 9 this morning for breakfast, and I shot 9 for lunch.
Wow.
I'll see how my shoulder feels if I shoot 9 more for dinner. But so the other thing I'm doing in this, I had LASIK in 2007, and over time, now my left eye is still like a hawk out there, out far distance, but my right eye has adjusted as my reading eye. And so I know people are like, how does he hit anything,
target
man?
With one eye and your pins with the other eye?
Well, that's why I got rid of my 50-yard pin. It just got too blurry. There was no precision to it. So I have a 20, 30, 40. It's like, all right, now I'm finding the pin is really clear or the target's really clear, but not both. So the other day I called my buddy Tom. I'm like, Tom, you do the optometry work for every hunter in this valley. What's my solution? He's like, come on in. I got these new multifocal contacts. You aren't going to believe it. You'll only wear one contact, but you won't even believe how good it is. So I have an appointment 2 weeks from yesterday, and we'll see how it works.
Wow.
But it's just an age thing, But you start getting to be a certain age, Corey, and you can't even cough without having a lingering effect to something. It's like, man, it's like my buddy Joe Gutkowski used to say. He was a smoke jumper, and he used to go up in the mountains here outside of Bozeman elk hunting with nothing more than just a backpack and a bivvy shelter in November. And he'd say, you young boys will learn this pretty soon, but this getting old ain't for sissies. Like, Joe, you're right. It isn't for sissies. I believe you, man. But do you use a light, heavy, or moderate setup for your total arrow? Because we get this question so much in emails, and we usually don't get into it. But in Idaho, you guys can't use expandables or mechanicals.
Correct.
So I know you're using a fixed blade.
Yep.
What's that setup look like?
So I'm kind of the middle of the road guy, and there's arguments both ways, fast and light. Get a bow that shoots fast, and because speed is a component of your kinetic energy. So the faster an arrow is going, the more kinetic energy it's going to hit with, which in theory should transfer into better penetration and all that. And then there's the other side that is, add 400 grains to the front of your arrow, make that thing, as heavy as you possibly can. And the weight contributes to your momentum. So when that arrow hits, it's got momentum driving it through the target, and you're going to get better penetration. Obviously, the downside is the heavier arrow you shoot, the slower your bow is going to shoot that arrow, and that's going to decrease your velocity. So it decreases your kinetic energy. If you're shooting a slower arrow, it's also going to spread your pin gap out. So your pins from 20 to 60 are going to be spread out more than if you're shooting a fast bow, which means you've got to be more accurate with your shooting. You've got to know the distance better, some of those things. So there's pros and cons both ways. Where I've kind of ended up is right in the middle. So I do add weight to the front of my arrow. It improves and increases the FOC, which is how far in front of center, that what the FOC stands for is front of center, how far in front of center the actual arrow balances. And the higher that percentage is, the more weight that you have up front. And with any kind of projectile, weight up front is going to stabilize that projectile in flight faster because that heavy weight's up front directing the back end of the arrow. Whereas if you have a really light front end on the arrow, it's not uncommon for that back end to kick really hard. The other thing you have to take into consideration, you add weight to the front of the arrow, it's going to flex it more when all of the energy from the limbs is transferred through the string into the arrow, and there's more weight up front to get the projectile moving. It's going to flex it more. So your spine becomes more critical on your arrow, and I did have to go to a stiffer arrow when I added weight to the front because I couldn't get them to tune with the arrows I was using before. So all of that being said, I shoot 468 grains total weight of the arrow. I put a 40 grain insert weight behind the insert on the front of the arrow. I shoot 100 grain broadhead or field point. And my FOC is around, I think it's 13%, which is probably lower than I want to be. I used to shoot 15 or 16%. But again, when I added the weight to the front, it increased it to that 15 or 16%. But the spine was too weak with the current arrows. Went to a stiffer spine. It increased the weight of the arrow, which changed everything there as far as the FOC. So that was a long answer to a short question.
So no, it's great. I love hearing this from someone who's an engineer because I'm an accountant. I went through the first 2 years of engineering before I decided to get distracted at Arizona State and got put on academic probation. So I did go through all the engineering courses, or at least all the physics, calculus, all that. And I filmed I do these stories. Last year I did 2 of them called Shop Stories out on my YouTube channel. And they're funny things that the camera guys hear me talk about. And so the one we just did, the guys in the office were asking me the question I just asked you. Well, what's your total arrow weight? I said, about 500. Depends. Usually it's comes in at 503 or 504 grains total everything. They're like, why that heavy? I said, well, let me tell you. I got the best physics lessons when I was a kid, and it had to do with soup spoons and wooden spoons. That every woman, every mom in the neighborhood knew she was at liberty to beat any kid who got out of line. So it didn't matter where you were. If you smarted off or you spilled the milk on the carpet or something, you got a whooping. And so my dad bought these industrial strength soup spoons, these big metal ladles, as the Ronco guy buy one for $4.99 and get 8 more by just paying shipping and handling. Well, he was handing them out to the moms in the neighborhood like they were candy or something. My dad was trying to score points or something. I don't know. So every woman in our neighborhood was armed with industrial strength soup ladles. And my mom used to give me a whooping with a wooden spoon. Wooden spoons aren't very dense.
Yeah.
So I quickly figured out that force, according to Newton's third law, what is it that two objects when they meet,
an object in motion,
equal and opposite. Yeah, whatever it is, that the size, the mass of the object has a lot to do with it, and that's why force equals mass times acceleration. Or, in the case of when your body, your 7-year-old rump stops a soup ladle, that's deceleration, which you are absorbing that much force. So by getting beat with a wooden spoon versus a big, heavy metal soup ladle, I quickly understood that I wanted to lean on the heavier side of my arrow weight than the lighter side of my arrow weight.
Yeah.
And little did I know, when I was 7 years old and Beverly Ranasset was laying the wood or the metal spoon to me for stealing some chocolate chip cookie dough or something. I don't know what I did to Beverly, man. She worked me over with that spoon a couple times. But a wooden spoon, it just left a little welt. A metal spoon that weighed a lot more, coming at the same speed or even a slower speed, that left a bruise from the cheek of my butt down to where my hamstring started, man. It's like, all right, when I grow up and I buy a bow, I'm shooting heavy arrows. So little did people know that we were getting all these physics lessons when we were kids, and they apply to hunting. So that's what my shop story is about.
I was just going to say, there are so many lessons that we learn in our youth that apply to hunting. Mine was always my mom telling me, it's not what you say that gets you in trouble, it's how you say it. And that is so true when it comes to calling elk. I mean, it's not what you say that gets an elk in your face. It's how you say it to the elk. And yeah.
I might have to have you do a cameo on this shop story that I'm doing. It's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
That could be some marriage advice also.
Absolutely. It's what you say and how you say it. Once you get married, they both count against you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And that doesn't matter whether you're the husband or the wife.
Yep.
That principle applies in both cases. So,
speaking
folks,
of that,
just understand that.
I was just going to say, my wife and I celebrated our 20th anniversary yesterday.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah, man, where do I speak to marriage advice now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can. Man, I need to send her some sort of certificate of achievement or something, some citizen
condolences
civic award. Well, congratulations, 20 years. Wow. You're getting up there. Huh.
I am.
Some of our listeners probably aren't even 20 years old. Well, most of them probably are over 20.
Enjoy it.
I bet you most of them haven't been married 20 years though.
Yeah. Well, I'm officially middle-aged, I think. When you're married 20 years, you officially enter middle age.
Wow. Boy, what is it when you're 12 years past entering middle age? Old age?
No, that's your golden years, I think they call that.
Really? I'm still looking for the gold then. My wife must have hid it out in the backyard in a coffee can or something. Ain't no gold in these ages right now for me, but... So just remember that, folks. When you were a kid and grandma was beating you with the soup spoon, force equals mass times acceleration, or think about it, deceleration. Same principle applies. So when that bull elk is trying to stop my arrow, I want something with a little more mass. So just my own. That's an imprecise physics lesson, and we're going to get all kinds of comments about it, but that's where I'm at. I'm going with a 500 plus or minus right there, 500 grain total arrow setup. I only shoot at about, I think last time I was through the chrono, I was at 246, 247. So
yeah, and that's the nice thing about where I'm at with my arrow weight. I'm still shooting 278 through the chronograph, which keeps some decent velocity, keeps some decent arrow weight. But the thing I've really found is if you're shooting 300 feet per second, tuning that arrow becomes more difficult for sure. And so I've just found a sweet range from 270 to 280 feet per second. It's a lot easier to tune those arrows and get them flying good.
Yeah. Well, hell, you'd really be able to tune mine then. Pretty soon you'll have to, if I shoot anything slower, you'll have to set up stakes to make sure I don't have it in reverse here. But well, we didn't get through all of our questions, Corey, but have we kept them long enough, you think?
Probably so. I was going to say if we save one, we at least have job security. We'll get to come back and do another episode.
Last time we made a call for guests and topics, and man, we got a lot of them. So some people are going to be like, well, why haven't you had this person on yet? Well, and it's not like we just call and say, hey, I'm Corey Jacobson. You should drop what you're doing and be on this podcast. It takes some scheduling, folks. So we're taking note. We're listening to what you're suggesting, and we'll be having a few of those folks on, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, well, that I can't make up any more lines of BS. I've pretty much run out of stories and things to blow smoke about. I
listened to another podcast. It's you know who Mike Rowe is.
Yeah.
He was the voiceover guy in the Ford commercials and really famous guy. Did Dirty Jobs, that show. Yeah. He's got a podcast called The Way I Heard It. And it's very Paul Harvey-like. Great stories, great storytelling. It's good stuff there. But he was sharing some stuff in his first few episodes, and he would say, it wasn't necessarily rumored based, but the title was The Way I Heard It. And somebody called him out on one of his stories and presented him with the facts and said, that's not what happened. That's not what really happened. And so he had to change his whole podcast platform because of that. And I think that we, from the beginning, have let people know that we're not experts and you get what you pay for here. So we can just continue doing what we're doing because we haven't set any high expectations.
No, and I mean, anyone who wants to argue with the physics of a wooden spoon versus a metal spoon, just send me an email, contact@randynewberg.com. And I probably have pictures of the welts. And I'll say that one there, that just looks like a little slap. That's a wooden spoon. You see that one that looks like I got hit by Brutus the Barber Beefcake or Jimmy Superfly Snuka? That's the metal soup ladle right there. One's a super light arrow, one's a super heavy arrow. So that's all. I got to make
who any of those names you just rattled off were, but
what? Oh man. George Scrap Iron Gadaski was from right down the highway. Yeah, George Scrap Iron Gadaski was from right down the highway here in Butte, Montana. Grandma used to make me practice being her announcer when wrestling was over. She missed it so much she'd ask me to be the announcer. So I'd sit there and act like I was introducing wrestlers, and me and my uncles would be doing the high flies off the couch, arms. And one time, Boog, my one uncle, put Jimmer in the pile driver, and that pile driver thing, they fake it on wrestling. Boog didn't fake it. He drove his head right down into the floor. Boy, there's some kai-ying and yodeling going on there. I thought, well, we might even have to call an ambulance. That was before 911. That's when you had to remember the actual phone number of the hospital. But yeah, I
we're going way back.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I bet you that was back 1974, 1973, something like that. So anyhow.
Well, that would explain why I don't remember not having 911 because I was born in 75, and as long as I can remember, 911 was the number to the hospital. Yeah.
Oh, man. Wait till you hear the rest of my shop story if you want to hear how old I was or how old I am. I talk about torque. And my dad he wanted to have the tallest antenna in town. And the way you adjusted it is you took your 8-year-old and you handed him the pipe wrench and a cheater bar, and you sent him out there, and he spun the antenna until you said, "Whoa, the channel's coming in." So my dad would sit there drinking his Pabst Blue Ribbon. Get out there and change the channel. I was the remote for my dad. We had 2 channels. we had Winnipeg, CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and Duluth, WDIO. And one was northwest of us about, I don't know what heading that would be about. Anyhow, northwest of us, west-northwest. And Duluth was kind of east-southeast. And so I had to get on that pipe wrench, and at 8 years old, I couldn't put enough torque to it, so he got me a cheater pipe. And that's how I learned that the further away from the point of leverage or fulcrum, the greater the force you can apply. Another physics lesson. I thought my dad was just having me go out there because he didn't want to get off the couch. He wanted to watch TV. And Ed Sullivan was going to be on at 7 o'clock. And so he sent me out there. Little did I know he's teaching me physics. So,
man,
yeah, that's how old I am. We had a party line. Did you ever have a party line? When we finally got
had an antenna in a tree that we turned, and we had a party line. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
Like I said, I'm
You're
probably
old
middle
enough
age.
then. All right. Yeah, I'm old age. So anyhow, when I get this whole physics for hunters shop story done, I'll let you know. Yeah, since you're an engineer, I might have you critique it, and then we'll just put it. We're not going to change anything. We're just going to say, according to Newton and Corey, Sir Isaac and Corey, according to Isaac Jacobson. Yeah, there we go, huh? There you go.
We don't need to get Isaac on here for advice. Anybody willing to take advice from an 18-year-old, you get what you pay for, and then
I said that because Corey has a son that would fit that name. Anyhow, when it's all done, I'm going to have that up there, and I'm not going to change what I said. I'm just going to say, well, according to Corey and Isaac Newton, this is how this is the real formula for this concept Randy's talking about, but Randy doesn't believe it. So, or at least my application was different.
I was going to say, I've already got a couple of things that I will point out and possibly correct in a couple of equations you've shared in this podcast. So,
oh, really? Wait, force equals mass times acceleration, right?
Well,
and,
to a degree,
and momentum
yes,
equals P equals M times V, wasn't it? Mass times velocity. Kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared or something like that.
Yep. No, you're on the right track.
Was I right with those? You know how long it's been since I took physics? Been 30 years since
track.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that I would use the height of the welt or the depth of the bruise to measure arrow penetration, but
no, yes, you should. We'll argue that one, but okay.
All right.
Anyhow, that's you talked about your precision. I don't care about precision. I just care about what it meant to me. Like, you know what? I got all those welts on my butt when I was a kid. I'm going to make use of it somehow. I'm taking that lesson to lunch, man. I'm taking that to the bank. So, well, sorry to keep them any longer, Corey.
Yeah, we probably better turn them loose.
All right. Thanks for being here, folks. Have a great day, Corey.
Yep, you too. Thanks, Randy.